All right, Matt Strong back here, this time with Jaiden Olsen. You're watching my YouTube channel, but probably some from Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. So I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe. We're trying to produce really good content, not so much for me, but awesome people like Jaiden and other stories in real estate. So today we're talking with Jaiden about his project that he just finished up in North Salt Lake. You'll see this is a super huge remodel where the vision changed along the way, talking about the debt structure of how it was financed in the middle of a shifting market going from all-time highs to some lows, and then the perseverance of seeing this project through so that all those partners on the project, lenders, could have a successful return, even though maybe you didn't.
That's okay.
But ending up with a super positive outlook, an abundance mindset, and really a fire to keep winning going forward.
Absolutely.
All right, Jaiden, why in the world did you guys even attempt to do this project?
So this project was unique because it was a place that we wanted, space that we wanted to play in the flipping business. We wanted to go big. We wanted to go extravagant, luxury space or semi-luxury space. And this was a great entry point for us. We had cash that we could play with, so we bought it cash, and we decided that we would implement highest and best use of the property.
Yep.
And that's the direction we started off. And
so people are seeing, you know, we're going to show some befores, during, and after photos along with this conversation. But did you go into this identifying this is what we want to do, or did the house lead to your ultimate vision of how far you wanted to go? Meaning,
There's the main driving factor that helped us decide what we wanted the end product to be was the accessibility of the garage. It was totally killing everything about the house. You couldn't park a Prius in the two-car garage because of the accessibility issues. So our vision was to add the two-car garage, then we get the master suite, finish out the space. It ended up turning into a much bigger project than that, just because of the lay of the land and the lot type. But there was that layout piece that we thought we were fixing going into this project.
And would the vision, and people hopefully can see the views that you have on here. It's on a hill in North Salt Lake.
Yep.
Right? So to kind of go into more why you attacked it this way, if the views wouldn't have been there, would it have been the same project?
I think we would have approached it a little bit differently because we definitely wanted to capitalize on the views. Other things that played into it is it was very close to the Eaglewood golf course. There was comps in the neighborhood that were surrounding it. But what we missed the ball on was that we were 2 streets over from the newer subdivisions that were justifying the market that we were looking at. So
Because this house was originally built, what, in the
77.
77, okay.
Yeah. And the comps that we're getting, the $250 to $300 per square foot, were built in the late 90s.
Okay.
And they were literally 2 streets over, so our comps, 2 streets over in 2 directions. So we were comping this in comparing to a different subdivision that we didn't realize was hindering our actual sellability.
So when you guys first started to kind of follow this journey, you were looking for a bigger project.
Yes.
And you saw one that you thought we could add a lot of value by improving, at a minimum, the parking, as well as adding a little bit of master bedroom.
Capitalizing on the view.
Capitalizing on the view. And at this point, you guys have skills, clearly you being an engineer.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to make you afraid to how do we rearrange this garage, support it?
Right. Anything's feasible with enough money, man.
Everything's feasible with enough money. Okay. So your vision, let's just maybe kind of finish this part of starting. So what were you thinking you would buy it for originally? Yeah. You're gonna laugh now knowing where, people are gonna laugh knowing where you ended up going. Yeah. But what were you buying it for? What did you think your initial budget was, and what did you initially think you were gonna sell it for?
Yeah, so just to give you a little more detail on the project, originally it was a 4,500 square foot home. We were going to add a 2,500 square foot addition to this home and turn it into this $1.5, $1.6 million incredible luxury home, which was awesome. We paid $400,000 cash for it up front, which was great, and our initial rehab budget was going to be $600,000 to $700,000 is where we thought we were going to land.
Okay, so you're thinking we're into this 1.1.
Yep.
We'll have some interest. It might take 9 months.
6 to 9 months.
6 to 9 months, and we're gonna pull $300,000 to $400,000 out of this thing in profit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So everything was super exciting and awesome.
Yep.
Until.
Well, let's back up a little bit. So we bought the house, and the contract. So we bought it from a wholesaler. The contract stated that the sellers had the right to stay in the property for 3 months.
Okay.
It was a deal killer for a lot of wholesalers because 3 months of hard money on an asset that's $400,000 just was sucking the profit out of the deal. We justified the acquisition because we were paying cash. We didn't have the interest payments that we had to make. We weren't bleeding holding onto this project. And it gave us time to go through permits in the city and the red tape to get this massive addition approved on this house. So we thought we were well prepared.
We're in February 2023 right now.
Yeah.
It was
April of 21.
April of 2021. So, yeah, almost 20 months ago from today.
Almost 2 years ago.
Almost 2 years ago. Okay.
Yep. So that's when we closed on the property. And hindsight, I mean, always 2020. We should have been way more ambitious and diligent in getting on these people, like even getting in and starting to break ground while these people were still living there.
Because if we just go back in the market timeline, COVID kind of hit March 2020, about a year before this.
Yep.
And the market was starting to get some legs unexpectedly.
Yeah.
So you guys are putting this under contract, buying it in April 2021, going, man, things are on fire. Little did any of us knew that not only would it be on fire, but it would the flame would keep roaring and the market would keep going up. So inventory is becoming less and less. There's increasingly more demand.
Yeah.
Everybody's feeling like this is a really good time to be doing.
It was awesome. Yeah.
And up to this point, you guys have done, a lot of cool projects, but nothing to this scale.
This is by far and away the largest rehab. I mean, I can't think of very many people that have spent more than $1 million on a single family renovation.
No.
And that's what we ended up doing. But
well, they do, but they just do 10 of them.
Yeah, that's right. We did it
not all at
in one
once,
project.
right?
So to add further context, so April of 21 is the purchase. We really start construction like July, August, and then really, like Jaiden said, the market continued to go up and up and up. And so really, you could argue the peak was maybe, February, March, April of 22. And so at this point, we're comping it at 1.8, 1.9.
Yep.
So again, at this point in February, March, we were just passing the 4-way inspection. So we still had a long ways to go. And that's when we knew that 8-month timeline was out the window. And so we knew we still had a long ways to go. But again, February, March, that was peak. And so we felt like we had that additional cushion because the market appreciated 10% more.
Yeah.
At that time.
Absolutely. So the setup, though, that's painting a pretty accurate picture of where your heads were at, where the market was
Absolutely.
at, where you thought you were headed.
Yep.
And the other thing that I think is interesting is that this is maybe something to talk about too, and 2020 vision's always amazing, but you guys, it seems like, also put not all of your eggs in one basket, because you guys separately have different businesses that support kind of your day-to-day. But as far as instead of doing 4 or 5 flips or this or that, it was like, we're all in on this one.
Sure.
Because it's a big enough project, right?
I mean, you're talking opportunity cost, like missing out on deploying that capital in other assets. I mean, I would say huge mistake. If we would have restructured this deal, we could have still tackled it, but maybe not put all our cash into the same deal.
Yep.
We would have been in a better position.
But up front, it makes a lot of sense. It was like, hey, let's not borrow the money. We got the money. Let's buy it.
The tenants have to stay in for 3 months. Let's avoid that interest.
So then let's just be a little bit more efficient with the financing, because it will be such a big lift.
And really, we thought we were genius because we paid cash for this thing. We went to the bank and got a first position home equity line of credit for an appraised value at $600 at interest rates that were 4%, throughout the life of the project. And we thought that was going to cover, 60-70% of our rehab budget.
Exactly. You thought that was going to cover the bulk of it, and it was smart because your cash purchased it, then you leveraged owning it with the equity that was there. Your cash, even though it wasn't a recorded second, is essentially now behind the home equity line of $400.
Right.
So, brilliant move to start, because you're generating, leverage.
$800,000 off of $400,000. We doubled our money.
incredibly cheap.
Right.
Way
Like,
low interest rates.
Yeah.
So, and this is where I would put a plug for you, Matt, though, is learning not only the opportunity cost of tying up your own personal capital, it's your most expensive capital, but number two is when you deploy HELOCs, and maybe other experienced investors know this was the first time for me, when you max out, a HELOC that is in your personal name, that's going to affect your credit score. It's going to also affect your debt to income to buy other properties. So I learned a huge valuable lesson of the hard money, because the 10% or 12%, whatever it is, there's a cost to it, but there's also a lot of benefits to it.
That's a good point, because at least for me, we don't put any private loans on your credit. And so that's not going to slow you down. And even if it's not an actual barrier, like to get qualified as far as true underwriting, it's sometimes just more of a mental thing of like, crap, this is on my credit, or I can't, now I'm stuck, I can't
for sure
do that. And then in the grand scheme of things, I mean, like, yes, 12% is more than 4%, but sometimes the ability to move quick is a benefit to having, more. I mean, I say that, and I've done a $2.5–3 million townhome project at 12% interest.
Yeah.
And it sucked, but it was the best thing ever, because we could move quick and we were agile and we didn't have to deal with the bank. Anyway, okay, so.
No, I mean 12% is nothing compared to today's rates either, right?
Yeah, well, 12% is almost exactly what the bank's giving you right now,
That's
so
right.
so that's wild. So that, like, a couple of things there to recap, just kind of this first part is the excitement of getting into something bigger that you haven't really done before. You clearly had the skills and expertise, but you actually hadn't waded through that water yet. So you didn't know all the nuances of what might come up along the way. Using cash instead of hard money to start, which turns out maybe could have done a little differently, even though you thought you were doing it the right way to start. And then, this is a big one, the opportunity cost, not only in terms of your cash that you had on hand that you could use for other things, specifically later, and or the opportunity cost of your time by going all in on such a big project.
Sure.
For one, at one time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure people watching this are like, oh yeah, I've done that before, I've done that before, I've done that before.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I mean, I think we'll reflect on this towards the end, but unbelievable, like, just taking action on something that you really had. You had a vision of what it was going to look like, but you still just had no clue how it was going to go through. Because I mean, think back to like just a really basic fix and flip that you did. At some point, it gets boring.
Right.
So some of you wants like that new thing, that new challenge.
Really, if again going back in the timeline to the middle of 2021, the impetus to this as well is not only the lot and the views, but at that point, everybody had HELOCs, everybody had cash flowing, and so all the $300,000, $400,000, even $500,000 flips were getting bid up and up and up, and so it was so competitive in that space. This was a way to break into a new barrier, plus push our skill sets and our boundaries personally.
We wanted to get out of the competition.
Yes, and you're thinking, why hustle and do 3 or 4 marginal flips when we can make the same amount of money on one in about the same amount of time?
Yep.
I love it. Okay, so you buy this thing, you're getting permitted. When did you start, if you did, changing your perception of what that scope of work and final product might look like?
I mean, frankly, very quickly. We started getting bids during that 3-month period of paperwork, right? And construction costs were going through the roof. Material costs were going through the roof. Our foundation package got bid out at $95,000, which was, after 3 bids, that was the lowest one we had. We had budgeted about $60,000, and now that's a huge deal. $30,000 here, $30,000 there, that included excavation and the concrete work. And then our framing package, we got a few more bids on that one. We ended up, our bid came in at $145,000, but after material prices and everything, we ended up spending over $210,000 just on the framing package and material and labor.
Yeah, you probably look back at the historical price of lumber, and you probably
we rode that wave hard, man.
Yeah. We were literally, it was like August, September. Peak.
Yeah.
So some of this is obviously just terrible timing.
Terrible timing.
Not that your strategy or vision was bad, just you had no clue.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're thinking the market's going up, we're going to be okay.
Right. We were watching the comps go up from 1.4 to 1.9, and we had budgets creep and overpaid on some of these things, and it's like, we're going to be fine.
Well, what about the scope of work though? Did it change your vision of making a master a better garage? Did you add more square footage after you bought it than you originally thought you would?
I would say the only thing that drastically changed was because the lot was on such a steep slope, the excavation for the footings down the back side of the property required us to go down almost 9 feet from the slab on grade that we were planning for the garage. And by the time you go down 9 feet and excavate and then bring in structural fill for that slab, it was almost cheaper to add the home theater room underneath the garage than it was to bring in the fill and everything. So we added another 900 square feet to the scope of the project, and I still believe that it didn't increase our spending too much, except we finished it out, and we probably spent too much on the finishes.
On the finishes, yeah.
You'll
see the photos here in a minute. You dolled it up.
Yeah, for the square footage, it was a cheap ad. It really was.
Yeah. So, but in theory, also you're thinking, well, 9 extra square feet, it's maybe not the same return on a price per square foot as like the kitchen finished square feet.
Right.
But still, you're thinking you're going to at least get
improve the value.
Dollar for dollar, if not $1.50 for $1. Coming back to you.
And I mean, for context, again, we've been doing this for about 3 or 4 years now, and so really, fast forwarding a little bit, but once we went to the sale of the property, got the appraisal and all those things, this was a lesson for us in really understanding how appraisals are done. Main level square footage versus basement square footage versus second level square footage, a bedroom square footage versus a living space square footage. Like, all of those are valued at different values. And now, hindsight, again, being a flipper or being able to look at future projects, really determining how a square foot isn't a square foot across the board.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. 100%. So in the timeline here, we're like, if you bought it in April, you're working on it, you're kind of realizing some changes. You're December, January?
So by the time we were framed out, ready to start plumbing, electrical, HVAC, we were through January, which was 4.5 months, 5 months of our building timeline. Huge mistakes were made on our part as far as managing contractors, making sure that we had people there every single day. We hired a contractor who does great work. He's a great framer, but he lived in Pleasant Grove, and the project's an hour and a half from his house. And he would get there around 9:30, work for 2 hours, set up his work, and then work for an hour, and then go take his 2-hour lunch, and then come back, and he'd leave by 3:30 in the afternoon. And we would check in on him once or twice a week, and that was not enough for this contractor. So when we hire contractors, it's really important to know where they're coming from, what their plan is to be there. I mean, when you're getting 3 guys on site to frame a house, and they're working literally for 3.5 or 4 hours a day, that doesn't move a project along very fast.
No, and then not only their time, but your time is valuable, and it's not like it was an easy drive for you guys to go check on it.
Right.
I mean, that's like, a big part of your day, just driving, talking, checking.
Absolutely.
When probably a lot of time you're thinking, man, I could be doing some more engineering work, or you could be chasing another project, or something like that, right? So, and then dollar-wise at this point, what are you starting to see where you're like, oh wow, we actually might need to raise a little bit more money? Like, are you there yet, or?
By February, March, April, we were out of that money we had in our home.
So about a year after you bought it, you're tapped out of what you thought would get you 60 to 70% of the way there, right? And so then you pulled basically a second, I think, to get an infusion of another 300. That at that point, kind of pretty confident at that point, it's like, this is all we're going to need,
right?
And I think we drew that out a little bit, right? So it wasn't all just a lump sum, and then it was like,
Yeah, it was draws on that.
So you're an engineer.
So this is a second position.
Yeah,
it's important to note that.
Second position, yeah. So your obligated debt now with just principal is $700,000. Plus so you guys are into this about 1.1 without interest and everything at that point,
including the capital we brought to the table, the home equity line of credit, and our second position.
And your second position. Yeah.
But again, I mean, it's not like it's easy to say hindsight. It's not to say that we were resting on our laurels, but at the same time, it's important to note that February, March, again, we're comping now 1.8, 1.9. So even though the project's going over budget, we're like, okay, we've made up for it with the market a little bit, and we knew that wouldn't last forever. Who knows how long? But at the same time, we were still confident enough to say, hey, let's keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, at that point,
You have no choice.
you have no choice.
Sure.
Because I remember coming and walking it probably at about this time where you were finishing the header over the doorway, the entryway.
Yeah.
You know, and like I mean, it was all you could see the vision of it coming to fruition.
Yep.
But it was also like, it felt like at that point you guys were like turning the corner on wrapping it up because the hard stuff was done. But then it was also the realization of like, oh crap,
We
this
have
is
a long
going to
way to
cost
go.
us a lot more than we thought.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we're already a year into this where we thought we'd be celebrating a sale. Well, let's pause there for a minute. Let's say the stars aligned and you actually had it up for sale last April
Yeah.
or this April. What? You guys would have
Yeah.
crushed it.
Yeah, we were
Absolutely,
comping.
yeah.
I for sure 1.8. Yeah, around there.
Yeah.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Yep.
Well, that's why we're having this conversation, right?
That's
Lessons
right.
learned, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's positives at the end looking back because you learned so much, but
Oh,
in the
absolutely.
moment it was like unbelievably
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm sensing the pain here of, you know, your guys' time, the lessons learned on who is the best person to come and do this. Like, looking back, let's say a framer would have been a little bit more expensive, but he lived down the street. That would have saved you guys months.
Oh, months. It might have been more expensive, but it would have saved us months on the timeline. It would have saved us months on rising interest rates. It would have saved us months putting the house on the market. Even if we were 3 months earlier, we didn't get this thing listed till
September 20th.
September. And if we would have been in August, that would have been a better time to list in a lot
Yeah.
of ways.
So, you know, what does Tony Robbins say? I think he's saying it more for relationships and stuff like that. Proximity is power.
Yeah.
But that is so true in this thing. Proximity is power as far as who's working on it and how close they are to it.
Yeah.
And even you guys managing it. Well, I know you didn't live too far away from it, and you were a little bit further away from it. But that is exciting. Like, not to take a quick tangent, but like I hear stories all the time, and actually maybe at the very end we'll touch on some of yours, where like deals that are far away from you, if they don't have a huge spread or a big enough complexity where you can hire like a manager on the ground,
Right.
it is a complete distraction.
Sure.
You know, like I have guys up here, like here, that are like chasing deals in Idaho, and I'm like, you're gonna flip a home in Idaho? You better be making $1 million on this thing because you're gonna drive up and back. Like, that's why the guys that are smart, like we know some of the guys in our local community that just ended up moving to Idaho. I mean, I think he wouldn't mind us saying his name. I think in Dakota, it's like, I'm gonna do Pocatello.
Yeah.
I'm moving to Pocatello. You know, and now he moved his operation from Pocatello to Oklahoma.
So you can do deals.
So
there.
he can do deals, and he's close to them,
Yep.
and he's going to have massive success because he's close to the project. So proximity is power, not just for relationships.
Absolutely.
We all get together every once in a while. I think we've become close and have a trusted relationship because we're in the same circles, not just, you know, virtually, but physically. So anyway, that's a good point.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into, like, let's say the final push of this project, you know, April through September. So it's over budget. We know we're, you know, feeling the pain, know what we're up against as far as timeline and interest rates. But that's where really relationships come into play, relationships with you, relationships with other private lenders and the banks. And if you guys want to elaborate on that, you know, making sure your ethics stay in place, making sure that, you know, relationships come first.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting transition point here because I'm sensing like your confidence level of seeing the finish line with the actual project is at the highest it's ever been.
For sure. Yeah.
Right? You're like, there's not too
Numbers
many
are still
complicated
working.
things.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we got to
just
put a
gotta
carpet
finish
in.
this out.
We got to put
Yeah.
paint, you know, we're not dealing with some major structural issue. But the other side's creeping in where you're like, we're over budget,
Yeah.
we're short money,
Yep.
we're not quite sure about the market anymore.
And it's important to note that we rode, like you talk about rough material costs that were creeping up in 2021. We saw the same thing go with finish products going up in 2022. Drywall doubled there for a little while. Roofing materials doubled for a little while. And we just rode the wave all the way through that whole project. We spent $65,000 on the roof for that house.
Well,
And
like you mentioned, there's no other option at this point
No option.
because the option to just leave it as is, you're basically lighting a fire to your money.
Right.
You know, and well, one thing, if you're comfortable talking about it, you know, Jaiden, you have a partner,
Yep.
right, on the deal,
Yep.
and you guys have a good relationship.
Yes.
But I'm betting maybe every once in a while you also have outside influences with like a spouse.
Mhm.
You know, maybe someone in your ear about you guys are freaking crazy.
Mhm.
Like that's a reality though
Yeah.
to a partnership and a real estate deal. How did you develop better maybe empathy and the ability to like see from someone else's point of view so that, because I've seen it where not only is the deal blowing up, but all of a sudden there's a fight
Right.
internally with a relationship.
Yeah, and I'd say that I'm really grateful for the partners that I've had involved, but we have definitely had those times when we come to the table and we're like, we're not on the same page here.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing that I learned in our partnership working through a project of this size is that we had to identify our roles very
Yeah.
quickly. It almost forced us to like, this is what I'm responsible for, this is what you're responsible for. And we took a hold of those roles, whether they were suited for us or not in a lot of ways, and we took them head on and learned a ton. But
That is such a good point. Having been in partnerships in the past where we were really good friends and we maybe didn't always have those critical conversations, and you found that when you duplicated the same task, you got to the point where you're like boxing with each other. You know, it's
Yeah.
like, and so yeah, you do need the best partnerships are those ones where everyone you trust, each have capabilities, and
Yeah.
you can regroup as needed, but separately you're working on the bigger goal, but not necessarily working on the same parts
Absolutely.
of it together.
And I can say from experience that we both, my partner and I both expressed that we're very grateful that this isn't our only source of income, because I can see that if this was our only source of income, this thing would have blown up in our faces a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
We're
good
very
tips
fortunate
for
that way.
people. I get
Yeah.
people ask me all the time, like, how do I set up a partnership? And ultimately, have a partner that has a different skill set or way they think different from you, and have your interests aligned. But you know, that was probably huge that each of you had separate sources of income,
Yes.
but you were still tackling this together. So,
Yeah.
and then, I mean, won't have time for this today, but I'm sure there were some separate, you know, conversations behind the scene at home where it was like, just trust me, this is gonna work out, you know, like we're not gonna lose it all, we're gonna be fine,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. No, lots of that, and I know that we both have very supportive families, and worst case we start over, and that's not the end of the world for either of us. We're still young, time's on our side, and we're not opposed to losing here and there.
Well, I hate to say it, but just as an aside, like now we're at 2023, the markets, you know, we'll get to the end of your story, but the market's come down. People that thought they had good deals, it's like, it's not even a real estate game right now for some of these people. It's like, it's when the market tanks and
Survival.
then life,
Yeah.
relationships tank, and you know, people can feel like the bottom is there. But what you just said is like that mindset of like, you know what, the sun's still gonna come up tomorrow.
Yeah.
No one's gonna kill me, right? Like, this is money, this is reputation, so I can always, there's always a brighter day. But I think
Absolutely.
you guys were thinking like, you got the resolve. We got to get to the finish line, and we've got to get ourselves the best chance for success. So you're kind of seeing the writing on the wall that maybe things are changing. What's now your strategy? You had to raise a little bit more money?
Yes, we ended up burning through the 300 that we got from our hard money lender, and bringing in a third position private money lender, which is something I would never recommend somebody should do. And we had to bring in another 300 to finish out the project.
So now what you thought was going to be maybe a $600,000 to $700,000 hard cost remodel is now definitely pushing $1 million to 1.1.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's
About
not
40%
including
increase.
40% increase.
And that's not including the lines of credit, personal lines of credit that we had to tap into to wrap this thing up all the way.
Yeah, and then, I mean, having been there, that doesn't tell the whole story, because now all of a sudden you're making monthly payments on stuff that's making you sick to your stomach, because you're
Yeah,
like,
let's talk
is
about that
this
a little
even
bit.
worth doing it?
Yeah, so once we tapped out our home equity line of credit, the credit union moved that over to an amortized loan. They closed the line of credit, said move it over.
Yeah.
One thing that we learned on this is that a lot of those lines of credit are going to be amortized at 5 years rather than a 20 or 30 year conventional amortization. And so our payments, we were bleeding very quickly, and it was something that was very difficult to refinance out of because we had so many open liens on the property and a project that was not completed.
Yeah.
And so this thing's costing us from halfway through the project $5,000 a month.
Well, and you also could have had the situation where if you guys weren't as good at communicating with, like, say, the private side of money, the hard money and the private lender, I mean, those notes could have been called due
Absolutely.
anytime, right?
Yeah.
So communication along the way, not just internally with, like, let's be honest, with your family,
Yeah.
but then also your partnership, but then also those other stakeholders, like, that was critical. And
Absolutely.
also not to, like, sugarcoat it, like, no, it's all good. It's like, no, we're having some issues. Like, this is maybe not going 100% the plan.
I know that there was times when, like, we tried to send weekly updates to all of our partners, and I know there was times when it was really hard to write those letters and say, this did not go to plan this week. We didn't get the things done that we thought we would. We're way over budget. But it's super important to have those conversations.
Well, and looking back, though, like, nobody wants to hear anything but the truth, right? Like, because it doesn't do anyone any good to, like, it's like, there's nothing to see here as the world's burning down, It's like, but anyway, okay, so I'm glad we're smiling and laughing about it now, but, and then just as an aside, as the lender, like, what I'm always thinking about, and everyone's going to look at it different, is like, okay, these guys, I know they're capable. This is a huge lift. It isn't going 100% to plan, but you can see the path that it's on to be amazing. And then I'm looking at it going, well, where's the value? Where's the value? The value is still there for me as the lender, so give these guys all the time that they want, because I'd rather have them do it than me do it, right? And then you guys also are going, okay, there's maybe not the final value that we're hoping for, but there's so much more value to us to finish it.
You still have an exit.
Than to give up now.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you're thinking, okay, this whole strategy of selling it, making $300,000 to $400,000, we still want that, but
we'll be happy to get clean.
We'll be happy to get clean. So let's kind of wrap up the execution of this thing, the finish line.
Yeah.
And then when do you start going, and then let's pause and go, where are we now when you're like, okay, we're close. So the market kind of peaked in May of 2022. You're still not quite done with the project.
Yeah.
Right? How, like, when are you starting to maybe not, like, sleep at night fully?
I would say that it was about when we were finishing landscaping. We had a bid for the driveway and a few retaining walls that the city was requiring that came in between $27,000 and $35,000. And that was one thing that, like, all right, we're out of money, and we have to get this wrapped up. This is like last thing on our finish line. We had to get this done. While they were pouring the driveway, they knocked our $10,000 garage door off its hinges and busted it. And that was another thing that we had to come out of pocket for. And things just kept going wrong. Like, things just kept happening. We had the meter had to be replaced because the concrete truck drove over the water meter, so we had to replace the meter. That was another $1,200. Shortly after that, the water main underneath the driveway that we just poured started leaking, and it flooded the basement in that house, and so we had to tear out some of the finished work in the carpet and get that redone. We had to tear out half of the driveway to replace the water line, and things just kept piling up. And at that point, I mean, we're both just, like, we're fortunate that we have good paying jobs that can float some of this stuff, but it is hurting. Like, it's hurting to float this thing.
Yeah.
And by that point, it's like, we just have to dump it. Like, so at that point, at some point along that trail, we listed it, and it was pretty easy to say, let's get this thing listed. I paid $50,000 out of our pocket this month. Let's reduce that purchase price by another $150,000 to get this thing sold. And it was very quick that we were able to take those cuts, but it was still like.
So you finished it though.
September.
Yep.
Got it listed in September 2022. Yeah, and like, now you're seeing the after photos of this thing, and this walkthrough video that you're seeing right now. This is, I mean, it was spectacular.
Beautiful
you guys,
house.
Unbelievable, beautiful house. I don't think you could have turned it into anything better than what you turned it into. And obviously there was a price tag. So let's just pause here and say, what at this point, and just give a rough estimate with your original purchase, your HELOC, the hard money, the private money, accrued interest, all your out of pocket, you're sitting at this thing exposed up to about
1.7.
1.7.
Yeah, 1.7, 1.75.
And remember, this is what you thought you would sell it for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is what you were into it, and you
Yes.
thought you were going to be into it 1.1.
1.1
Right.
is where we
Yeah,
thought.
so
we
you're
were gonna be.
$600,000
Yeah.
over budget.
Yep.
So I mean,
That's an
pile on.
accurate
Let's laugh about it.
representation.
600,000. That would
We'll
get
clap.
you, that
Nice
would,
house.
it'd get you a lot of
Yeah.
big gulps at 7-Eleven for the rest of your life. That's going to do a lot of good things, right?
So really to cap it there and to tie into the ending, of course, timing didn't work out. Hindsight's 2020. We feel like we could have taken one of the blows, whether the increased labor and material costs and or the interest rates rising. Obviously, I mean, now that we look hindsight, they rose the fastest they ever have in history within a 6-month period. But having the culmination of both of those, we got the front end and the back end.
Yeah.
So we feel like
Totally
we could have
destroyed.
soaked up one of those.
Yeah.
But the time span, and so for instance, looking at future projects, again, we thought this would be 7-8 months, turned into 15, 17 months.
Yeah.
That's something that I think people need to really look at on their project timeline, is how confident they are their timeline.
Yep.
Yeah. I'd like to back up a little bit here. So we listed in September of last year. In July, we started looking at alternative exit strategies because the market was, it peaked.
Yep.
Our comps weren't where they were. We kept continually going over budget, and we're like, okay, how are we going to exit out of this thing? We looked at long-term rents. We looked at short-term rents. We looked at maybe having one of us move into the property for a period of time, and we looked at selling it. Those were our main exit strategies. A few things on that. We both had a line of credit that was maxed out and had been maxed out for the last year on our personal names, hurting our credit scores and hindering our bankability.
Yeah.
If we didn't have that, we would have been bankable and been able to refinance. So another point for hard money.
Yeah.
Number 2, debt service coverage ratio loans were going to cover a good portion of this on either long-term or short-term rents, but because the interest rates had come up so high, the price or the appraisal wasn't there to get us out clean. We would have had to bring money to the table that we couldn't quite cover. And I mean, again, hindsight, like we keep saying, if we would have looked at some of these exit strategies or refinancing some of this debt, or keeping even the home equity line, transferring the home equity line to a loan that would be amortized over 20 years, that could have saved us having to sell and making one of these other exit strategies a possibility for us.
Yeah, so never having really done that before, you didn't realize what would it look like if you tapped out your HELOC and they required it to be amortized.
Yeah.
Which in the fine print somewhere it clearly allowed them to do that.
On a 5-year schedule, not a 20-year schedule.
Yeah, that's a big difference in payment.
Yeah, it made it impossible for us to find a clean exit strategy like we had in the back of our minds.
So
these are
not
our
knowing what you
options.
didn't know and knowing that things could have changed so dramatically, one, you obviously you never would have done the deal, right?
Right.
But also all those other factors, there was so much. I mean, this is like a classic case of you didn't realize your structure of finance would need to change or change so dramatically. You had no clue that the market would change.
3 times.
3 times.
Yeah.
You didn't realize the cost of materials would go through the roof.
Yeah.
And then the market would hit and then drop
Yeah.
so fast. So the game changing along the way, the change of the game, and then your exit strategies that could have been maybe thought through a little bit more proactively ahead of time because you didn't know what you were getting into,
Right.
could have maybe helped a softer
Absolutely.
landing.
Any one of those things would have made a softer landing.
Yeah. Well, the positive of all of this is you executed at the end of the day an unbelievable product.
I would say that the wins on this is that our investors didn't lose any money. We paid everybody back 100% of their money plus the interest that they were due. Number 2, we finished a $1.1 million renovation on a single home, which I don't know is something to be proud of or not, but we did it, and we pulled through on the finish line.
Could you have bulldozed that thing and built from scratch and
not with the market prices where they were? Not with the building costs.
It came a lot closer than we originally anticipated.
Yeah.
But the benefits there would have been faster build because new construction is faster than tying into old. But yeah, from the very beginning, we thought no way it would even come close. But again, the materials and labor in 21 were just unprecedented.
Well, and the other thing that we weren't actually going to talk about, but I think it's worth noting because it shows to your guys' character and commitment to your partnership and your team having an inside view of, at the point when you pretty much committed, we just have to sell this. You didn't really shortchange the process of your team member that was listing it to really lean on him to help, because I'm sure you guys made some sort of agreement of like, you're helping us this whole way, you're going to see it through and sell it. And I mean, I had countless conversations with him on the sales side as the broker. And like, so I mean, it was, so let's kind of like polish this off and then recap lessons learned and then stuff like that. But I mean, your drama of this thing didn't end trying to find a buyer. Like, you guys ended up selling it, but it was like, you know, it was not the easiest sales process either.
Oh, it's
to
extremely
try and
dramatic,
get this sold, you know?
Very interesting, yeah.
So where'd you start the list price?
We started at 1.73 million.
And at that point, you're thinking, man, if we do this, we might lose $100,000.
Well, we would have broke even close.
You would have broke even.
Yeah. So the expectation from the beginning of 2022 was, hey, we thought we were going to make $300,000-400,000, to hey, we might make 200. To the middle of the year is like, okay, let's just get this done and break even, and then to the final result. So we listed September 1.73. You know, chase the market down a little bit, and really, I mean, the ultimate offer, you know, we ended up going with, and all of that was a tedious process, but ended up, getting it sold.
But, you know, also terrible timing. I think September, October, November, December were the worst possible times to try and sell. I mean, it's catching falling knives.
Yeah, that's really when the rates had first baked in enough, and then the holidays, people just were like, put the pause on.
Yeah, there's so much fear in the market. We didn't even get hardly any showings. We had open houses every week, and we'd have several that nobody would show up to. It's very disheartening.
Yeah. So if you're okay talking about where'd you end up?
We ended up selling at 1.387.
1.387.
After all concessions and everything.
Yep. So after the blood was all drawn out, were you able to get you're able to get the HELOC paid off?
Yep.
All the private loans, just kind of took it in the shorts with the out-of-pocket money.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Well, why was this a success at the end of the day?
I would say, just like any education, it comes at a price. I personally, we both learned so much through this process: how to manage contractors, how to navigate challenging financing situations, how to better prepare for multiple exit options, how to communicate really well with investors, and especially have those hard conversations. And I think the number one thing that we both learned is what strengths we do and do not possess.
Gosh, that was right there. That was gold. I mean, those points right there, we could talk for hours on each. So, and then what strengths? Okay, so what were your biggest mistakes?
Mismanaging contractors and budget.
Okay.
Those are two things that are very difficult to say. I'd say that we rode that wave of appreciation simultaneously riding the wave of the rehab budget, and it almost, like, the rehab budget came secondary to getting the project done at some point, and so we weren't monitoring how much we were spending. It was just, we got to get this done.
And this project's hard because you'd committed to buy it. It was in completely dysfunctional shape. Even if you were to just remodel it in its existing sphere, you know, like,
wouldn't have worked.
Once you bought that, you were at the point of no return unless you just wanted to scrape it and sell it as a vacant lot. Right?
Which we probably would have been better off doing.
Oh, coulda, shoulda, woulda there. What do you?
So two other points that I wanted to point out was, the ultimate end buyer ended up being cash buyer. So at the same time, the market, falling knives, all of that. I mean, there is something to be said about there's money out there, right? Like, having an abundant mindset and still believing and still, knowing your market of the buyer. And that's why we felt, in September when we were listing, there was still a little sliver of hope, because in that market, the 1 to 3 million range, there are a lot of cash buyers that are either coming from California or whatever. So that was what we were still hopeful, that the interest rate wouldn't impact us as much if it was a cash buyer. And then the secondary thing is, flippers really need to learn this, especially if you're getting into the higher end or the luxury markets, or just as homes appreciate in the valley in Utah, is jumbo loans. That's something that going into this project, I had no clue on jumbo loans. And so the end buyer, knowing all the hoops that the end buyer has to jump through to get a jumbo loan, is really going to preclude a lot of people from buying it, but also hinder, the regular mortgage market got hit, but jumbo loans became even more strict.
Yeah.
Yeah, jumbo loans, they not only interest rates, but they had to have over 12 months of reserves cash sitting in the bank after the acquisition, and so many more requirements that it made it almost impossible for somebody to come in and finance this thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
One other question, I know we're going a while here, but how has your relationship with money changed, if at all, during this process? The
Yeah.
fear of it, the excitement of it, the utility of it,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like.
Do you want to talk about cycles and that?
Well, what I was telling Jaiden is this may be a gold nugget, that this has been a value to me. I just got done reading a book recently, and it talked about just spiritual journeys and journeys in this life, and just what you said, what is the positive out of it. This book talked about being thankful for every lesson that you get, positive or negative. So I'm thanking myself for going through this process, and maybe that's a way to cope, I guess some people would say. But if I take it in that vein, the one thing that's been changed about my mindset on money is most people that work a W-2 job that have never invested or don't invest, their mind path is a linear growth of money. They say, okay, I make $50,000 a year. If I can save $5,000 a year, that's going to take me 10 years to save up $50,000. That is linear thinking, just that progressive model. This puts you in a corner where either you have to come up with $300,000, or if you have to take a big loss, or if you have to keep moving through a project, it forces you into a situation where you've got to come up with money somehow or whatever. And of course you have to be ethical about it, but I think that's the biggest thing for me, is thinking of money in a non-linear fashion, because there's other projects that we have under contract right now that can more than make up for all of these losses that we did on this project, and that those could happen the next 2 to 3 months, and we could continue on our path. But where most people losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, I mean, they could write themselves off as never making it again. The failure, and they could ride off into the sunset and never invest again.
Well, the thing that I love about you guys is you do have that abundance mindset. You're solution oriented. You're looking for a path to still win, even when the game has changed. And then some of this actually kind of, I think, provided some little miracles, like at least in your life, right? Because when you're talking about exits, you decided, okay, I got to get serious. Maybe I need to move my family into this thing.
Right.
So you put your house up for sale.
We sold our house.
And you didn't necessarily, when you started this project, you didn't think, oh, we're going to move into this, or So you kind of, like, you personally, like, you were able to harvest some of the equity in your house. You sold it in anticipation that you might, if this buyer fell through, you might need to move into here to kind of save it. And in a way, like, the positive for your family is like you're on a new adventure that feels really good to you, that you wouldn't have been maybe open to without some of the pain of this project.
Yeah. And I just to piggyback off what Joey said, is that the lessons learned for me is just a hunger and a drive and a gratitude. I am so grateful, number one, that this didn't sink my ships. Like, $350,000 loss could have sunk anybody's ships, and I'm grateful that I'm still standing here, smile on my face, and hungry for more. And I've also developed an extreme gratitude for knowing what my strengths are and are not. I know what I'm good at, and I know what I can conquer, and I have the confidence to go tackle another $1 million renovation if I need to. And there's just more deals out there. We're just going to go do more.
Yeah.
And bigger and better.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, on that positive momentum path, what does the future look like? What are you excited for going forward? Well, let's start with maybe what are you not going to do right now based off of this, and then what are you looking forward to do more of or new of?
Yeah, we're taking a break from flipping for a minute.
Okay.
Recognizing that we tend to over-improve and go over budget very easily. Personally, I'm more excited about the development side. I recognize some strengths in new construction, and I'm excited about taking some of these projects from the ground all the way up through completion. I really enjoyed that whole process.
Yeah.
And I know that with the right systems and projects, I can be very successful at it.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, if you would have just been a year earlier, this whole conversation, like, maybe there's no lessons learned because you're like, oh, great, we got out of this and made $100,000. whatever.
Win.
Win.
Yeah.
Right? So it is unfortunate to have to go through the pain and suffering, but sometimes that's where you learn your best lessons. So I guess one of the takeaways, we had a bunch of summarized points here, but what you start, see through to completion.
Yep.
Because what brings results ultimately is what value you can bring, even if the way that value is measured changes, meaning the market goes down. But ultimately, you guys did exactly what you were intending to do. You finished an amazing, super high scale remodel and completely changed the use of that home, the property, the views.
Yeah.
And what you couldn't control, honestly, a lot of it was out of your control from what you knew when you started.
Right.
You didn't realize material prices were going to go up, and you didn't realize the market and interest rates were going to go. So in some ways, it's like you got to pat yourself on the back and go, we kind of did what we thought we were going to do. We just maybe didn't do it as quick as we thought we were going to do.
Sure.
With knowing what you knew at the time.
And I mean, lessons learned as an investor, those things will always be a fluctuation, and there will always be something out of your control.
Now, and then if you want lower risk, more predictable, stick in those $15,000 to $20,000 remodels, but you're never going to hit more than maybe like a $20,000 or $30,000 profit, and you probably won't ever lose more than like $3,000 or $4,000 bucks.
Yeah.
But your vision of what you're headed for won't ever be any greater than that. It's almost kind of like a linear mindset, like you're talking about with W2. Now, there's so many different ways to invest, right? Like I like that model of doing the smaller homes, but you got to do 100 of them.
Yeah, that, and maybe that's me being naive, but my understanding of being a flipper now is you either have to be volume or you have to be high end or just high margin. There's either high margin, which could be, like Jade said, development. There's definitely high margins in development, but in the flipping game, either high margin or high volume.
Well, I think we've reviewed a lot here, and at the end of the day, aside from all the technical, the way you structure money, the risks of the market, I think the overarching lesson learned is don't give up on your dreams, don't give up on your vision, have good people around you, treat them the way you would want to be treated. Communicate well,
Yep.
and you're going to come out at the end of the day just fine.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yep.
Awesome.